In a previous video, I gave an overview of a cheat menu widget that I built that has an auto-populating dropdown. So you can see here, I have a number of different materials, and this dropdown is being populated by the contents of this materials folder here. So in this video, I'm going to show you how that works under the hood. So let's first look at the widget blueprint itself. This is widget blueprint auto pop dropdown. A widget blueprint has both a designer section and a graph section. The designer section is where you're going to arrange UMG elements to create the user interface. So this is pretty simple. I've got a horizontal box, and within that I've got a menu name button, and that contains a text block. And then in the dropdown section here, I've got a combo box for our options. So jumping back to the name for a second here, this text is bound to a variable here. So if I want to look at that, we can. The return value here is promoted to a variable, and that variable exists in auto-populate settings. These are all of my settings that are going to be exposed to a user when they set this up in a cheat menu. So let's look on the rest of the event graph here to see how the logic works. I've got two strings of logic here. One is on pre-construct, and one is an event dispatcher that I've set up. The one on pre-construct is going to be for building out the options of the dropdown. The first thing we're going to do is grab that dropdown name text and set it as the menu name text, so our dropdown has an appropriate name. From there, we're going to look at any asset registry paths that have been provided by the user. Again, this is public, so it's going to be set in the details pane for each instance of the dropdown. And we're going to loop through each of those. And so our output here is effectively a path name for each folder that we want to look in. So we'll pass that along to this get assets by path node, which is going to target the asset registry. And we can decide if we want a recursive search here. So it'll either dig into subfolders within the target path or not. And from there, it's going to output an array of data structs for all of the assets that it finds in that directory. In this next section, we're going to check each asset to see if its name contains any of the strings that we've added to our exclude assets by contain string variable. That variable is an array and it's public. So each instance of this dropdown will have a setting in its details pane that allows you to add one or more strings to this array. Now we have a variable here called should exclude, and it's being set to false here because we want a clean slate each time we check a new asset. If the asset name does include one of the strings we're trying to exclude, then it will be updated to be true, and then we'll break the loop because we don't need to check any other strings for that asset. And then we will move down here to determine whether or not it should be added to our map or not. So if should exclude is not true, then we'll go ahead and add it to our map. This map here is a string to soft object reference map. The reason we're using soft object references here is that a hard object reference will automatically load all of the options in your dropdowns every time the cheat menu is built, which is not what we want. So we're going to continue on here with soft object references. Now, the reason that this is an unsorted map is that the order of the assets in this array here are not necessarily in alphabetical order, and we may want that for our options menu. So the next step is, once you have mapped out all of the assets that should be added to our dropdown here, let's put them in alphabetical order. So once we've gone through all of our registry paths, all of our assets, and checked them to see whether they should be added to our map or not, then we're going to jump down here and we're going to do a little juggling to alphabetize our array. So what we'll do is we'll get the unsorted string and soft object map here. We'll get all of the keys, so in this case, just the strings. And now we have an array of strings that we'll call the sorted string array. And we'll plug that into this sort string array node, which only works with strings. Then we will have a sorted version of our string array. And for each of the strings in that array, we'll find its corresponding object reference from our unsorted map, and we'll add it to a new map, which is the sorted string to soft object map. So basically what we're doing is stripping out all the strings, alphabetizing them, and then making a new map in that order and repairing all of the soft object references back to their strings. Once those are all re-added, we are going to add the options to our combo box. So we'll have our sorted string to soft object map. We're going to get the keys, and then we are going to add each one of those as an option to the combo box. This last bit of logic down here allows us to have a default selection. So even with our list alphabetized, we may not always want the first option to be the default option. This allows us to use a variable called default selection, which again is a public variable available in the details pane for each instance of the dropdown. So if the string that we provide to this find option index node is either blank or is not a match for one of our options, the return value here is going to be -1. If it's not equal to -1, then we know we can use that index. If it is equal to -1, then we'll just default to using 0, and that will be the first index in that options array. All right, so that handles all the construction and population of the dropdowns. The next thing we need to do is have an event that is tied to the dropdown actually being changed. So I have here an event dispatcher called onSelection. So what it does is anytime the combo box is changed, it's going to call onSelection and pass through our string and also the soft object reference for that asset. We also pass through selection type, which is just provided by combo boxes. I'm not actually using it for anything, but we may as well pass it through. So now let's look at how these are hooked up in our cheat menu. So again, we've got 2 instances of our dropdown, and each one has its own auto-populate settings. So we've got the name of the text, we've got its asset registry path, anything we want to exclude. You can see here I'm excluding the word landscape from the materials. And if we look at event dropdown, it's got its own settings. So each of these has an onSelection event that's provided by that event dispatcher. And if we look at that in the graph view, here is our logic for each of these, right? So they're both onSelection, but one's targeting material dropdown and the other is targeting audio event dropdown. The first thing we need to do is async load the asset. Again, this is a soft object reference, which is good because we don't want to automatically load everything that's in our dropdown menu. But it does mean we're going to have to load each asset as we select it. So the first thing we do is drag off this and go to async load asset. And there we can get a hard object reference. Now, if we drag off this, we're going to need to cast to whatever class that object is. In this case, this is my material dropdown, so I'm going to cast to materials. I'm going to show you a quick little thing that's a little bit annoying just as a gotcha here. But if I cast to this, cast to materials, it's going to automatically connect it to this main execution pin, which is not what you want. You want to make sure that's attached to completed because we want to make sure the asset is loaded before we try to cast it. Otherwise, the cast will just fail. And then as that material, I'm going to set the variable that I created called material here. And that's getting used below down here to set the material on the sphere that I'm spawning. And that's all we need for that one. Audio event dropdown is similar. Again, we're going to async load our soft object reference so we can get a hard object reference. From there, we're going to cast to its class, which is AK audio event. And then from there, we can do anything we can do with an audio event. So again, I'm just going to set this as a variable called amp audio event, which I will use later on to post my event. And that's all of it. I hope that was interesting, and thanks for watching.